So I have to start with an apology, and you should never start with an apology. I was backstage, so I couldn't hear any of your last session. So if any of this ends up being repeated, I apologise.
It's very likely it will be.
Okay, so good. We sat here 4 years ago, first ever Sports Matters, and had a very good, engaging chat about sponsorship and the bank and your philosophy and what have you. I'd like to get into that in a bit and see where we've changed, or hopefully you have changed, other than just moving to London. But for anyone here, and maybe just for me, because you've probably just done this, why does the bank sponsor stuff?
Because we want to engage people. It's as simple as that. I think the metaphor of any associative platform, and that could be sport or arts, music, whatever it may be, is simply a metaphor for companies to reposition themselves through the medium of something else that humanizes them. So whether it's your staff, whether it's your customer, targeted customers, what we are trying to do through our sponsorship portfolio is to be liked and loved a bit more. Because we sell all the time our products, as all companies do, and we have relationship managers who spend time with our customers as well. But we're trying to create an affinity that creates soul, very simply.
You getting it right?
I hope mainly. What's interesting for sponsorship is that, and for me, I've been at HSBC for 12 years now, so I've seen a lot of changes. The sponsorship as an investment needs to follow business objectives. And as business objectives change for companies, as they all do, so sponsorship must change with them. So when you think of our golf portfolio, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that we are after certain demographics in certain countries and appeal through the prism of golf, which has its own set of values, of tradition, of fair play, of all of the things that golf has. But HSBC is going through change and will continue to go through change, as all companies do. And probably the most exciting part of a job that I have, or a job like my job, is that you have to adapt the portfolio to suit what the business is trying to achieve. And that can be kind of interesting.
So what's changed in 4 years, and what are we going to be talking about at Sports Matters 2021?
You're going to invite me in 4 years? Wow, thanks.
Will you still be the head of sponsorship?
Almost certainly not. I'll get rumbled. It's only a matter of time. I think what's changed in 4 years, and so much of this conference has been about this, is the way people consume and the way people engage their passions. And if you think just in 4 years that, well, put it another way, when we do sponsorship, we used to spend a lot of money on traditional advertising to support our sponsorship. We virtually do none now. We do content, which is different from advertising. And the channels that we're doing that is obviously much more social media, digital. But we're also trying to listen to the fan more, because they can self-broadcast. And so what's really changed, I think, is just how people consume stuff is changing and will be different tomorrow. And that is an opportunity, but it's also, I find, very frightening, because you don't necessarily know what the right way to engage is, because your Snapchat today may be something else tomorrow. And if you're trying to engage certain people, in the old days it was really simple, which is probably how I got a job in sponsorship, is you talk to people through quite traditional channels. The channels have all changed, they proliferated, and they keep moving on. And all of us involved in this industry, of whether it's music or sport, are trying to keep track, but it changes. So it's a movable platform all of the time.
And you're actually, just to highlight this, you're moderating the next session on fan engagement, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the big, the burning question that everybody involved in anything which is to do with fun and fans and customers and people is, how do you get people's attention in a world that is absolutely buzzing? And there is no way that you can filter everything now. In the old days, it was easy. If you you didn't even have a phone. If you went away on a summer holiday, you didn't have a mobile phone. I mean, this is 25 years ago. You were done. The world has changed so much, and this is what I was saying about golf, when we were talking about the modernity of golf, is, for me, what's changing too, if we look at through the prism of just sport, is sports have to change because consumers have. It's not an option to say, well, we've always done this for 150 years. Fine, but nothing much happened for 100 years. Everything's happened now. And if you want to engage with people, then you have to be speaking their language. And our language, all of our languages are changing daily. And it's really interesting. It makes it intellectually a real challenge for everybody.
What do you think the sports industry needs to do to keep up?
Listen. And the more data analytics, the more trends, and then interpret those trends. I think that's the important thing. It's whatever the definition of insanity is, to keep doing the wrong things over and over again. I think a lot of sport continues to do that. And it's interesting, you know, people talk about sports that have innovated. Maybe it's when sports are faced with perhaps extinction or financial disaster that they wake up to themselves, human beings being quite good at sort of survival. Cricket did it. Cricket was moribund, except in certain places, probably India and pockets of southeast England and Australia. And you look at it now, it's a reinvigorated product, kids are playing it, and it's exciting to see it can be done. And this sort of fusion that this conference is all about blending music, blending entertainment, blending sport, creating festivals. These are all how people consume, so therefore sport has to follow, I think.
But back to the bank, some time ago, the last time we spoke on stage, you said that you had 200 clients, 200 customers that you were targeting. Is that still the same, or what's the strategy now for HSBC?
So we now have it's terribly exciting. We have a dual strategy, which sort of keeps me really sort of chipper in the morning. Employed. So we have our sort of corporate focus, which is in sport anyway, much more the focus on things like golf and rugby and tennis, which demographically you could very much see are after the corporate market, the high net worths. And we're after those that represent a massive part of the business, particularly here in Asia. 70% of our business is in Asia, and the golf portfolio is been well spoken about already. Rugby Sevens has done a very similar job, very international, both new Olympic sports, but the bullseye demographic for us is the middle class and the business consumer. But in certain markets now, we announced a big deal 14 months ago with British Cycling in the UK, which was almost the antithesis, what we're calling a societal partnership, more to differentiate rather than to sort of give it a clever marketing nomenclature. And that is to engage with everyday people. And that's been really important. The bank got so big and global that we were beginning to perhaps lose the love that in certain places around the world, UK being one of our more important hubs, the feeling was, well, we know that you're a big international, one of the biggest companies in the world, one of the biggest banks in the world, but have you lost the love of the people? So we had to re-engage, and we're about to, and I can't tell you what it is, so don't ask, but we are about to announce a new, we're looking at new partnerships, but we've got a very clear strategy for this region as well to deliver against that, because we have to.
Okay, so without being able to ask you what's coming next, if you had more money to spend, I imagine that you've got a fairly healthy budget, but if you had, even if you doubled your budget, what would you do with it?
I think in this part of the world particularly, I would want to spend much more. I wouldn't buy many more platforms, but I would activate our platforms a lot more, particularly social and digital, and get the engagement far broader. Media buying in the old days used to be quite straightforward, where you buy some print, buy some outdoor, do some TV. Now marketers are faced with the activation budget that they have to deliver a sponsorship. And understanding the right channel and where to put it is confusing. And anyone who says they have the answer, they're either lying or could they come and see me, because I'm still struggling to understand, but I would want to spend more on activation. We spend a lot already, but I think that would be if was given a sort of a 10% upweight or whatever it might be.
I just doubled your budget.
Oh, you doubled it?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I might do something else. But I think activating properly, and I know this is talked about at conferences all over the place, but having done a job like the one I've been lucky enough to do for a long time, you get the best return by activating properly. And I think one of the biggest areas, particularly in this region, is that I don't see enough brands really engaging. And it's not that they don't get benefit, they will get eyeballs and they will get affinity to an extent. But when you do it well, a sponsorship, and we've been lucky enough, people have been, I guess, kind enough to say we've done certain things quite well. If I take something like the Hong Kong Sevens, which is sort of the ultimate ahead of its time sporting event, which incorporates obviously a party, it's a festival, it's sport, and now a sport that's jumped on the caravan of the Olympics and will only grow. But we, as a boring old bank, activate it like we're a beer company. And that's really cool, and people expect it, and we've got affinity from that. And I think there's so much more that brands can do, and particularly because the medium of sport in particular is so alluring because it's one of the only live appointments people have left in their lives. So it's of the time, it's right now, it's that binary nature. And brands can communicate in a way that they can't always, but they have to activate and spend against it. And that would be my constant pledge to the industry, or urging the industry, keep activating, because otherwise you will not get return.
Which brands do you think are getting it right?
It's interesting, I was having a conversation with various people here about that question. I think anybody who engages with their target is a good sponsor. So that to me is, and that engagement can be through great content, through great channels, through social media. It can be about B2B activation of wonderful hospitality. So any brand that does it and gets the association, so I would say HSBC, wouldn't I? But the reason I think we get the Hong Kong Sevens is not because we get ourselves, is we've taken time to understand what the Hong Kong Sevens is all about, the carnival. So I think of sponsors, particularly in the big sports. You take a sponsor like Heineken as a good example, is they've nailed the social and digital media strategy. Clearly their product is quite enticing for the sports they're involved with, but they get to know their fan. So I think when we talk about who does it well, is if you know both your customer and the fan and blend them and interpret data, you've got half a chance of making a really powerful campaign, because most sponsors are commodities. Most sponsors are trying to differentiate between their own peer and competing. Get a good sponsorship going, you can really distinguish yourselves and create warmth. And people select partly on warmth.
On the social media side of things, again, referring back to when we first chatted, the bank had just started using YouTube to activate some of your stuff. A lot of the conversation over yesterday and the next 2 days is around social influencers and KOLs, key opinion leaders. Do you work with any social influencers or KOLs? Is that something the bank gets involved in?
We do, we're learning, and I think we've been a little bit slow, and I've attended a couple of conferences where you've heard from people from Instagram, Facebook, and so on, and I think all of us with our activation agencies understand that, particularly in the world of sport, is that the most powerful part of sport is about the humans that play and compete. And the value of athletes who have got really strong Instagram accounts, say, and are understood by the fan, not only on a personal level will do much better because they will be valuable to potential sponsors, but it allows them to come to life, because Instagram in particular is such a wonderful way of people being able to demonstrate who they are, what they do, what they like through the medium of photography or a photo or video. And we're going to certainly start driving that through Rugby Sevens, where there's no doubt the sport is off the charts good. These athletes are amazing, and there's tries every 15 seconds or whatever it is, and it's a razzmatazz. It's kind of, you'd think that Sevens was invented a few years ago. In fact, it's 130 years old, but it's of the time. But no one still really knows who the players are, apart from Carlin Isles, because he once ran really fast on 100 meters a long time ago. And yet that caught the imagination. There are many athletes better than Carlin, and he's a great athlete, but they're astonishing, and we're really going to be working to push that. So in answer to your question, opinion leaders, so yes, we would use rugby ambassadors, golf ambassadors, etc., to try and communicate, but also what we're trying to do is find key opinion leaders maybe from the world of music who may like one of our sports. Because if, for instance, a good example is we have the HSBC Women's Champions here rolling into town in March next year, and then 6-7 weeks later there's the rugby. What a great opportunity for Singapore to celebrate international sport on its own doorstep. But we need to tell the people of Singapore. Key opinion leaders are a great way of doing that, and I think we're by a long chalk not there, but it's going to be the focus for us.
You just touched on women's sport, which I think is a very interesting development for the bank. Do you have a separate strategy for women's sport, or do you treat it all the same?
No, I think look, we're a big sponsor of sport, and men and women play sport there, and we have male and female customers. We should do both, and we do. I'm very proud of the fact that we've been involved in women's golf since 2005, so we've been there for forever. I'm really proud of the Rugby Sevens and the steps that World Rugby and others have made to take this game. 40% of the growth of rugby is coming from girls. It's really big, and it's being played in schools, I know in Hong Kong, a great deal. And it's wonderful to see, because when I was growing up back in the early Middle Ages, girls' rugby was sort of, it was played a bit, but it was a little bit frowned upon. It really isn't now, and that's great. And watching the women play on the HSBC World Series, and anyone who saw the Olympic final in Rio, it was really good sport. And you don't have to put a gender prism on that. It was just great sport. Paula Creamer sinking a putt here 5 years ago in Singapore, probably the best moment of my career in terms of not just the theatre of someone hitting a 5-wood, 230 yards onto the green and making an 82-foot putt. It wasn't that. It was her reaction and the people around her's reaction of humanity, of just sheer joy. And that's the inspiring thing about sport, I think.
The Women's Rugby World Cup was amazing to watch. I mean, we had it on Facebook Live in Hong Kong. It was a whole new era in consuming sport. I mean, clearly, the new announcement you're going to make is that you want to sponsor the Cycling Stingrays under-14 girls rugby team.
I wanted to talk to you about it, but I know you've brought the contract.
You heard it here first. Unbeaten all season last year.
Congratulations.
Great coaches, I should say. I've now completely lost where we were. We were talking about brands that were getting it right, which you nearly answered. What sports are getting it right in terms of engagement with sponsors and engagement with fans?
That's a great question about what sports are getting it right. I think any sport that is looking at itself and if it needs to reinvigorate. Soccer, for instance, football isn't really having to change very much. It's the biggest game in the world, and the sport kind of sells itself. But I think they're doing a lot more round the sides now in terms of engagement and that fan engagement. So I always like to see what football's doing. I think American sports always lead the charge in terms of fan activations. That the American sports market has always been about leading with the fan, whether it's NASCAR, NFL, all the rest of it. And when you're lucky enough to go and see events in America done well, it's all about the consumer. And if you get it all about the consumer, then the sponsors will follow. And if the sponsors and people follow, broadcast follows, and you create a virtuous circle. So I think the new frontier for all sports, and for rights holders in particular, is put the fan first. And it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But you have to put the fan first. So I was talking about it when you couldn't hear next door and you were having a cup of tea and not listening, was that I feel that golf is the ultimate sport that needs just a bucket of cold water poured on itself to go, we can make this so much more engaging. It's a brilliant game. But the players sort of insisting on sort of silence for 4 counties worth of distance to ensure they can concentrate. Get on with it, hit the ball. And if people are whooping and hollering, as demonstrated in Ryder Cups, they love it. And I'm not really answering the question, shed pomposity and get on with the fans is the way forward.
So what are we going to be talking about in 4 years' time? 2021, sports matters, all that matters?
All that matters. Well, I hope that we'll be basking off a Welsh win at the Rugby World Cup in Japan, because it's about time. That would cheer me up enormously. We've obviously got Olympic Games coming up. I would love to see in this region there are 3 or 4 major sporting events that are happening in that time, that they knock them out the park in terms of the experience, and that the world of sponsorship in this region grows up a bit and doesn't sort of see itself as a sort of the cousin that's a little behind the rest of the world, but be on an equal footing. I'd like to see more brands invest, and the platforms are here and they're going to continue being here. And then we can say that within your conference that you've made a difference, and we've continued to educate the region about how to do this stuff that matters well.
Fantastic. Well, look, I would love to continue this conversation. You really are one of the easiest people to interview, and certainly about this subject. But now we're going to turn you from gamekeeper to poacher, and you're going to become moderator for the next panel, which I'm going to introduce, I think, and then you're going to sit there. We're going to bring 2 more chairs on. But ladies and gentlemen, Giles Morgan, thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy.